When the baby was born, they named it with no royal title. And that, to me, suspected that that's the course they wanted to go. I mean, Archie, Harrison, Mountbatten, Windsor.
He was in close proximity to history for decades, raising the camera as secrets appeared behind regal grins. Arthur Edwards took pictures of more than simply the royalty. He saw what the world was not supposed to see. After being silent for years, the man now trusted with the at last, the closest access is speaking. And what he discloses gently shatters carefully chosen pictures. Unspoken truths, power, and tension are present in every picture, concealed for years. What, therefore, did Arthur Edwards observe that fundamentally altered our understanding of the royalty? The quiet that was more powerful than images. You will witness the people lean forward, looking for evidence, waiting for something substantial, only to understand how meticulously everything was kept hidden. Whispers spread, faces froze, then a voice from within the royal media circle eventually started to explain why years later. This is not an easy story. Rumors. It has to do with control, power, and the use of quiet as a weapon. Pregnancy has always been a public ritual throughout royal history. Outside as early as the 1980s, cameras were positioned along the pavement at London hospitals to record Princess Diana, and later presenting infants to the world with pride as Catherine, Princess of Wales. From these events, the birth of Prince William to George, Charlotte, and Louis became collective national memories. It was mandatory to take pictures. They were customary. However, when Meghan Markle joined the royal family, and I believe that a lot of that is obscured by the clickbait culture, which can be extremely demeaning, that custom quietly disappeared. By 2019, when the excitement surrounding her something felt different as pregnancy peaked, there were locked doors in place of flashes and official pronouncements, and abrupt limitations. Photographers were instructed to take a back seat. Press conferences were cancelled. A well-managed blackout replaced what ought to have been a well-known royal routine. For numerous, it was accuracy, not privacy, that caught the attention of onlookers. Arthur Edwards, recognized right away as a seasoned royal photographer with a career spanning more than 40 years. He had recorded almost every significant royal event since the late 1970s. He was familiar with the beat of palace life, the unwritten guidelines, and the times when customs waver yet never pauses. This time, it broke entirely. No hospital, no official bump pick stages, no photographs for confirmation. For a guy accustomed to being welcomed into history, the exclusion was shocking. Speculation increased as the weeks went by. Commentators wondered why visibility vanished at the same moment that openness was anticipated. It's fantastic in a lot of ways. That he's done that, and I believe that just goes to show. A desire for control was mentioned by some, others to image management. At this moment, internet conversations burst with ideas, such as assertions of extraordinary public appearances and artificial bumps. Brief video snippets distributed, examined frame by self-described specialists who contended that some of the movements seemed out of place for a late pregnancy. While royal authorities resisted, medical professionals remained silent. The end product was a vacuum, and vacuums make noise. Tabloids populated timelines and pages on social media. The inquiries grew louder as the palace remained silent. Meghan was observed strolling confidently at gatherings. However, the evidence that people was never given what was anticipated. The promise of authenticity was never fulfilled. Looking back now, particularly from the viewpoint of people who were a part of the system like Edwards, it feels less like an accident. Does Lady Donna Spencer have a job here? Indeed. Would she ask to see a picture? For me? And more like to a plan. Images are money in the realm of royalty, when they convey a message when they are withheld. Additionally, the lack of a photo can occasionally alter a story more than any headline could. And what shocking reality did a single unexpected image do as it started to rewrite the story? What will be revealed next in the shaky hospital clip? The 5 seconds that would not go away. A brief, unsteady video surfaced online and immediately refused to be disregarded. Bright lights humming in a hospital room above. The internet was astounded by Meghan Markle's effortless movements. She sunk, got up, and turned heavily pregnant, with the assurance of someone accustomed to cameras. More people heard about those 5 seconds than any formal announcement, ricocheting around social media and making a strong impact in royal watching communities outside of London. We definitely long for that after the pandemic and everything else. We longed to be able to say hello. Additionally, like what came next was more about mistrust than celebration. Viewers replayed the video frame by frame, magnifying, slowing down, and disputing each motion. While medical speakers become experts overnight, armchair analysts were invited to share their opinions about what late pregnancy should and shouldn't look like in the comment sections. Websites such as YouTube, Reddit, and Twitter became 24-hour courts of opinion, where conviction was more important than certainty. Rather than heartfelt headlines, the coverage was skeptical and incisive, encased in terms like made and staged. Official voices became louder as the commotion increased. Faded. The palace refrained from making any firm denials or providing any in-depth justifications. That the storm was not subdued by silence. It nourished it. Every unanswered question felt purposeful, as if the lack itself was a message. In the meanwhile, expertly styled photos appeared, polished to a sheen that felt more like advertising than everyday existence. Critics thought the perfection was staged. More action than evidence, strengthening the notion that everything was screened before being made available to the general population. There would inevitably be comparisons. I believe you are quite certain that it was a divine order. Perhaps all of you are turning your friendship into art. Longtime royal admirers observed how this felt different from earlier times. Pregnancies in the family, particularly those characterized by modesty and regular appearances. Meghan's history, when an actress was unjustly drawn into the conversation, severely at times, as people questioned motivation and judgment rather than reality. Skeptics and supporters divided into camps, each believing the other was overlooking the obvious. When reputable royal Arthur Edwards, a photographer, quietly admitted that boundaries had been established. He said the cameras weren't advised to use the standard methods to record Meghan's pregnancy. Some people thought this sounded similar to basic privacy protection. Others saw it as the final piece of the puzzle, validating anxieties rather than relieving them. Caution was translated in the internet argument echo chamber into hiding. Then came the murmurs, not from official briefings or senior assistants, but from someone on the Sussex orbit's boundaries. She said there was a discrepancy between the private reality and the public narrative. That the response was cold and quick. Talking ceased. Messages were sent unanswered, and those wanting to relay what they had heard felt a sense of silent caution. Palace observers instantly saw the pattern, remembering times in the past when silence was more powerful than words. It was more than simply a dance or a pregnancy by the time the clip had been thoroughly examined. It had developed into a representation of a larger conflict between image and control, curiosity and trust. 5 years of discussion have resulted from seconds, demonstrating that in the contemporary era of royalty, even the tiniest moment can cast the longest shadow. But how did demands for privacy start in our contemporary day of royalty, when small things cast enormous shadows? To resemble a meticulously planned performance? Within the palace of when there is silence, the discrepancy between privacy and performance is readily apparent. It settles fairly nicely. In public, many expressed a desire for tranquility, separation from eyeglasses, independence from continual observation. However, the camera was invited into situations that the majority of individuals would protect with their life, including the area designated for a child's arrival that is silent. That conflict between words and deeds served as the impetus that no matter how thoroughly it was covered, it would not go away. Long before every whisper was magnified by social media, because it's like a charming love story, seems incredibly inclusive, and has representation, a more subdued form of control had been perfected by the royal system. Former insiders used to talk about doors and invisible pressure, closure without giving a reason. The life behind the scenes was notably detailed by one retired guard. Gates and soon discovered a well-written warning at home. Others encountered it as well. Work possibilities and cordial calls with a hardened tone dissolving and a startling, purposeful loneliness. The message was always evident, yet it was never yelled. It was safer to be silent. The palace did not panic as interest in Meghan increased. It was ready. This was not a firefighting organization. It set up the lighting so that the smoke appeared deliberate. The number of strategy meetings increased. Layers inspected, softened, and approved each line. Of power, everyone was still subject to the old rule. Wait, don't say anything, and don't deny anything. It was an easy belief. The noise would be erased over time. However, the digital era does not erase, it archives. Then came times that would not go away. May 6th, a statement linked to Frogmore Cottage surfaced online shortly after 3 in the morning, stating a reality that went right to the core of royal custom. If there are issues and a deficiency, someone must speak up if there is an inequity and a lack of fairness. Whether genuine or not, it endured unaltered and never formally disassembled. Rules of succession, extensively documented and seldom contested, it became a topic of discussion at the dinner table. Visual information from across continents. Public appearances were continuously repeated, slowed down, examined, and debated. By the when first-person accounts appeared in literature years later, everything had already changed. Some of the early claims fell through. Some were louder simply because no one spoke to them directly, while others became more audible upon closer examination. In California, under continuous sunlight, a new picture was being formed, one that was contemporary, worldwide, and refined. It was more difficult back in London. Officials attempted to protect the crown without seeming to protect anyone. Individual. The files became silent. Briefings turned into riddles. Even experienced figures like Arthur Edwards, with decades of access behind him, standing outside the palace walls. They will undoubtedly, if they have any sense, they'll board a plane, travel up there, and spend the weekend discussing it with the Queen. Felt the chill of being left out. The irony is keen. An organization that was founded on ritual and visibility is now afraid of raw expose rather than the actual scandal. Behind the serene expressions and flawless waves, there is a framework that has been educated to endure rather than to explain. However, endurance is not sufficiently lengthy. One raw image, one wild voice, or one forgotten screenshots may fall between the cracks. And when that occurs, the stillness that hitherto shielded the monarchy turns into the exactly what sustains the narrative. Could the same power that previously defended the monarchy now be the one maintaining its beneath the palace corridors? Where nothing is ever completely wiped, are secrets that remain alive. When quiet turned into the loudest, there was absolutely no sound in the palace's huge corridors. Vanishes. The facts remain intact. They are stored far away, meticulously filed, and branded confidential. Inquisitive eyes and generations of inherited privilege. Ceremony and continuity are essential to the monarchy's survival. Moreover, the reaction is quick and harsh anytime those two are even slightly shaken. When personal murmurs around the Sussex chapter, and I was really fortunate to have every justification sold out within amazingly, in less than an hour, the delicate subject of succession came perilously near. The atmosphere shifted. Doors closed more quickly, polished smiles tightened, and the seemingly indestructible system felt brittle all of a sudden. A disturbing pattern developed away from the public eye. Before addressing someone they trusted, someone close to the inner workings attempted to talk quietly, but consistently. People. According to reports, this individual contacted the media, claiming pressure from the palace. Claims emerged several offers that sounded like help but seemed more like hush money, all disguised as intimidation. When argument failed, fear took its place. What most disturbed this person was not personal danger, but the conviction that a serious issue was being concealed, and that they would be complicit if they remained silent. The succession plan has been viewed as a unique recipe that has been improved since the 1700s and is nearly religiously preserved devotion. The entire structure is at risk from any interruption, which reflects my vision for the brand. It's basically a never-ending dance. And by late 2010, I believe that formula in any business struck the internet, a merciless force. People on the internet started comparing dates, evaluating statements made in public, and challenging official declarations. What once uncontested, it was now immediately scrutinized. Once, palace restraint admired, began to resemble avoidance. Behind the scenes, communication personnel worked long hours, developing the skill of answering without saying anything at all. History provided no ease. Edward VII paid for love with his crown in 1936. During the 1990s, the polished illusion of royal perfection was shattered by Diana's candor. By the time streaming services got involved, the audience had shifted by 2020. This was no longer far away. Organization. It was satisfied. Viewers repeated video, halted interviews, and discussed theories at breakneck pace. Once, regulated broadcasts were used to filter royal life. Additionally, I didn't initially believe that was something I wanted to convey in that manner. Was now viewed as a series that had been issued all at once. Commenters ceased talking about responsibility and legacy. Rather, they examined strategy and consequences. The tradition was no longer used to evaluate monarchies. Instead, flexibility was used. It was shocking how quickly public faith could crumble, rather than who was in what position inside the royal hierarchy. In the contemporary era, what revolutions and battles could never truly accomplish, a single viral post may. The importance of royalty, in general. Every scandal looks for a handy person to take the blame. It wasn't a strong assistant or a senior royal. Unexpectedly, a medical professional was pulled into a story that is much larger than their part. One fact emerged when accountability got hazy and attention changed. Inevitable. Secrecy is no longer a barrier in a world that is constantly observing. It's a call to suspicion. Occasionally, the silence intended to keep the crown safe ends up rocking it instead. Thus, what secret feature in that perfect birth announcement prompted the hush intended to keep the crown stable start to tremble? Suddenly, is everything worth questioning? When the quiet spoke louder than headlines. When news reports announced that the Sussex baby had been born to a reputable doctor, that the announcement sounded perfect, almost too professional to be questioned. It was a perfect fit for the type of royal update that the public had learned to anticipate. Succinct, assured, and comforting. However, that lovely image was short-lived. The narrative started to feel shaky almost immediately, like a key block is missing from a neatly constructed tower. Timelines became hazy, details changed, and certainty slid away. Images from a magnificent evening at London's Albert Hall surfaced well before the official remarks could settle. Hall reappeared on the internet. Dates, appearances, and previous reports, observing that there was a lack of alignment. The palace had provided one version. The papers reiterated it, and then doubt was injected by an unforeseen voice. There were rumors that the doctor's own husband completely refuted the allegation, and all of a sudden, one sentence turned into a tangle of inconsistencies. The outcome was confusion, which is more harmful than wrath. For a company known for its flawless angles and calm demeanor, this era felt remarkably public. This family takes measurements. Everything, including timed grins and well-coordinated attire. One is not clear the message was sufficient to disrupt the routine. The online community intervened when there was no explanation. Online platforms were ablaze with hypotheses, side-by-side images, and in-depth analyses that went well beyond pleasant curiosity. Every frame, shade, and shadow was examined as though it contained a concealed significance. Rather than confront the increasing cacophony, the palace fell silent. No follow-up, no just silence, please. That strategy had worked in the past. Once, silence carried power, but the days of regulated transmissions and print deadlines had passed. In the era of silence turned into an invitation to fast sharing. Where official voices one post at a time, rumors raced in to fill the void. As time went on, the narrative developed a life of its own. The focus shifted from a single announcement to trust, image, and command. The internet, unrelenting and meticulous, did what it usually does. It continued to dig. Replaced statements, archived clips, and screenshots held greater significance than recent press releases. The lesson was being taught in real time. When information is withheld, theories come in early. This tactic had long been recognized within walls of royalty. The skill of silent messages was perfected by Queen Elizabeth II. When she changed what looked behind her, wishing to communicate without words. In her 2019 Christmas broadcast, cautious viewers saw that something was lacking. Once on the shiny table, a framed picture of Prince Harry, Meghan, and baby Archie had vanished. It was not clarified by any announcement. None were required. The message was sent silently. By the time focus shifted to something else, the truth was still evident. The monarchy may use custom and moderation to protect its privacy. However, the contemporary world operates by distinct regulations. Secrets no longer fade silently. They circulate, follow trends, and come back. Nowadays, a tale doesn't finish in silence. It changes its shape. Moreover, the public always listens most intently between what is stated and what is concealed. What mysteries did royal silence reveal? Once safeguard? And why did silence mean more than a declaration? As we return to a time when royal births are guarded, the deafening force of royal quiet. Once upon a time, the world was unaware that a royal infant had been born until well after the doors of the hospital was closed. In the 1980s, when Princess Diana gave birth in London, the streets were quiet, cameras were kept at bay, and privacy was paramount. No cell phones, no live commentary, no leaks. It was no coincidence that there was silence. In actuality, it was dignity, a conviction that some moments are more meaningful when they are hidden. The same concept of self-control would eventually reappear in a completely different manner. Inside, decades later walls of the palace. In the future, a royal speech at Windsor is broadcast on television. Staged with care as always. Each frame had an impact. Each ornament served a purpose. Appearances were never taken lightly in the monarchy. The lighting was intentional. Thus, when viewers saw a familiar family portrait missing from its customary location, the impact was instantaneous. Palace aides provided innocuous justifications. Decor changes, space constraints, and a technical modification. However, those who were familiar with the facility knew better. Nothing in that room moved carelessly. The Queen throughout her reign, Elizabeth II, developed her quiet dominance. She didn't correct headlines, publicly debate, or trading comments through interviews. She spoke in symbolic terms. And the missing picture said a lot at that very moment. She conveyed a message that was comprehended throughout Britain and beyond without using names or making claims. It wasn't rage. It wasn't dramatic. Distance was the cause. Unmistakably measured distance. This was the monarchy's take on contemporary communication, a reaction molded by centuries of custom. The Queen changed the scenery where others might post or object. No press briefing had the same impact as the outcome. Read by royal observers it right away. This was not a mistake. It was deliberate. A soothing reminder that silence can be more potent than words in the royal system. In contrast to the world of today, could not be more obvious. In a time where intimate encounters are streamed live, and the Crown opted for absence because attention is money, that absence was significant, because it reflected traditional ideals of patience, control, and seclusion. Additionally, it implied that behind closed doors, something more profound was happening. When conversations about responsibility, leaving, and headlines from California to London were dominated by public discord, that earlier time felt less nuanced and more prophetic. The silent decisions had been signals rather than conclusions. History demonstrates that the monarchy is setting the stage for repercussions when it retreats rather than responds. Instead of dialogue, the events that followed demonstrated that royal silence is never meaningless. It is computed space that permits events to come to light on their own. The Queen compacted decades into that one missing photo, of experience into a single visual choice. No conflict, no justification, just a pause that changed the narrative and served as a reminder to everyone that the Crown frequently speaks when it remains silent. Everything. But what unexpected turns appeared under the polished exterior when silence spoke louder than words? The royal smiles? When the loudest statement is made by quiet. Each and every polished portrait and a well-timed grin typically mark the conclusion of a royal tale. However, this chapter strayed somewhere far less certain. Rather than applause and clarity, it concluded in stillness, unresolved inquiries, and a Santa Barbara hospital that abruptly appeared to disappear behind its own walls. In the spring of 2021, as interest in Sussex's newest visitor grew, the focus shifted from Palace Gates to Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital, which many believed contained every response. Confirmation ought to have been easy in a world where proof is everything. A room number, a silent instead, there was stillness and a nod that said, "Yes, this happened here," grabbed center stage. The couple received a brief online congratulations from the hospital, a courteous move that appeared authoritative enough to ease some anxiety. But in the digital era, peace is short-lived. A few weeks later, parents in the area were informed that a widely shared video on the internet was not shot during the height of CO limitations, then reminders of the stringent masking regulations that were in effect at the time. Nothing straightforward, nothing simple. Well-chosen words that appeared to vacillate between yes and no. That ambiguity turned into fuel. Early in the summer of 2021, virtual communities were no longer spreading rumors. They were looking into it. Headlines were substituted with screenshots. The floor patterns were contrasted. There was discussion on where to put the lights. Medical equipment turned into hints. Timelines were updated and redrawn once more. Not in a formal workplace, but between kitchen tables and blazing laptop screens all around the planet. At its core, it was crowdsourced curiosity. Sharpest, motivated by the conviction that every public narrative leaves a trail. However, the central institution of it all remained unwavering, constrained by professional caution and privacy restrictions. The nothing else was provided by the hospital. No confirmation, no denial, just a silent, refined unwillingness to enter the storm. It was frustrating to journalists. It was a textbook for attorneys. In a time and situations where remaining silent might be tactical, saying nothing frequently conveys enough information. The occasion was made even more remarkable by the contrast. Meghan maintained a smooth public persona, despite the growing number of inquiries. Above the commotion, written comments, carefully published photographs, and a serene assurance pervaded the air. The luster was not diminished by the absence of verification. If anything, it made the split between certainty and appearance. No formal clarification had been reached by the time the discourse slowed. What was left was a lesson in contemporary royalty. Palaces are no longer the only places where stories exist, or news releases. They appear on the internet, in pauses, in partial responses, and in the institutions refuse to fill these gaps. Occasionally, the strongest statement is not what is stated, but what is deliberately omitted. Additionally, if the true tale isn't what terrifying reality lurks beneath the eerie quiet of this place, not in what is said, but in what is concealed. Quiet. There's a strange, almost unnatural quiet in the room behind the palace lens. No anxiety, no obvious fear, a lack of the worry that most women experience when they are about to give birth, a painful experience that is so severe that it frequently fades from recollection. In a time when that serenity stood out clearly in a world where every heartbeat is shared publicly. The Globe observed, bided its time, and updated its screens. However, the world's most powerful family made no offer. No pictures, no there was silence, no familiar hospital steps in London, and no doctors. Soon, that quiet became more weighty than any announcement. Absence became the norm in a monarchy based on ritual and restricted access. Loudest declaration of all. The cameras that used to swarm royal entrances were abruptly outlawed. Medical information that had always been freed, even if only briefly, and disappeared. Hospitals that typically verified arrivals appeared to vanish. From the entire narrative, pregnancy was never the only factor in this. It concerned who was in charge of the image of the crown in the era of digital technology. Years later, in modest words that carried unexpected, Arthur Edwards, a seasoned royal photographer, drew back the curtain. His words were straightforward but unnerving. They were instructed to avoid them. It barely mattered if that order originated from a position of authority or protection. It had the same impact. An institution that had been meticulously polished paused, and it was observed. In terms of branding, it was expensive to hesitate. The royal narrative fell from palace control for the first time in decades into public conjecture. Cracks had already started to appear by 2019. Social media, unrelenting and merciless, filled up the blanks with hypotheses, disclosed assertions, and repurposed video. In the never-ending scroll of unanswered questions, each one multiplied and grew like wildfire. Comment threads and timelines, once characterized by centuries of custom, ritual, and predictability, the monarchy appeared to be a vast franchise that was having trouble managing its own story. Every effort to stifle conversation merely made it bigger. Speculation increased as official voices fell silent, and the palace's quiet became its own assertion. Then came the turning point. A leak over the internet. The carefully crafted image of the Sussexes was shattered by a brief but powerful explosion. There was no press when it arrived. Congress, royal stamp, or formal declaration. It hit through screens. Whispers and exchanged messages fell with devastating impact. Screenshots proliferate like wildfire. Resurfaced, reframed, and reinterpreted interviews. The carefully constructed story of duty, devotion, and prudence fell apart. Into a free fall. What had been described as privacy started to resemble control. And control started to resemble terror. This was no longer a story about heirs, castles, and crowns. It had become a contemporary power struggle that takes place in comment sections, timelines, and online news sources from California to London. The long-standing royal brand, thought to be untouchable, suddenly showed signs of fragility. Not because of what was discovered, but rather because of what stayed concealed. The palace revealed frailty in its attempt to preserve perfection. In order to evade attention, it verified its strength. The lesson is also very clear. In a society where people are dependent on mystery and visibility, are no longer romantic, it is flammable. Thus, what do you think happens when a reputable royal photographer finally shares long-kept secrets? Are we going to discover the reality we were afraid of? We want to know what you think. Remember to subscribe and like.